Hi everyone, good evening. Hope you're having a nice day. I am Danya Gomez, ETHMiami's community manager, and this is the Road to ETHMiami series. So we have a very special guest today. Our guest is Laura Cole, aka Elsie, and she's a blockchain attorney. How are you, Elsie?
I'm so great. So happy to be here and seeing your face, Danya. I missed you.
Yeah, I miss you too. I mean, we met earlier this year at ETHMber,
Yeah.
and you have such an impressive career. I mean, could you tell us a bit about yourself and like your background with blockchain and Web3, and
Yeah.
especially law?
Yeah. So I've been a lawyer for 9 years now. I originally practiced in tax law in Indiana, and then I moved to Florida and started doing environmental law. And I got a little burnt out. I was at a government agency and I was just really getting frustrated with the bureaucracy and all the stuff that kind of comes with that. And plus, the politics of it got a little intense. So I didn't really like what I was being asked to do because I grew up on a farm and things were getting tense with the farmers. And so I was looking for an outlet. Otherwise, enter, the blockchain scene in Miami, which is incredible, especially at that time. And there was events, you know, every night of the week, and it was just entering into that bull market. So everyone was just really hyped about everything, and with the pandemic, I feel like Miami was still really wide open, and so there was just a lot to do, a lot to get involved in. So I started after hours going down to Miami to hear some, founders speak on whatever it is they're building, and I would meet the people in the room, and I kind of I'm not a technical person, so I'd just be like, oh, I'm learning blockchain, and then people would ask you what you do, and I was like, oh, I'm just an attorney. And they're like, oh, you're an attorney, you can help with this, like help me write this tokenomics paper, help me read this, help me edit this, help me, because a lot of people are so technical in this space, they don't have a lot of the discipline to just sit down and read and digest a lot of stuff. And lawyers have an innate patience for digesting and reading heavy documents. So I kind of just naturally started jumping on projects because in the Web3 space, people really reward those that are just hands on. It's like if you want to enter this space, there's so much room for you to just enter it by being an active participant in a community, or even just meetups where you're just talking to people, and you're like, I have this to offer, and someone is happy to help you navigate the space if you're willing to contribute whatever skill you have.
Yeah,
So that was kind of how I got in.
because at the end of the day, these experiences motivate you and also like shape your Web3 journey.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I actually wanted to ask you what motivated you specifically to specialize in blockchain law, and like what specific areas do you have been focusing on?
Yeah. So I think I was just inspired by the developers and the
Mhm.
builders in the space that made me really want to engage and branch into that area. And then my background's always been one government agency or another. So I did tax law, which is like the IRS. And then I did environmental law, which is like the EPA. And so now I just switched to another regulatory agency with the SEC and CFTC and FinCEN. So I've just been trading in terms of like the legal side of things and the laws that apply. If you understand how to apply regulatory um, matters, or you understand how to navigate how government works, and you know how to handhold your client through navigating the government and regulations, switching the area of law is just a matter of getting up to speed, because you kind of know how to be that transactional attorney and figure out what you need to know and where your gaps are. So that wasn't that hard of a switch to do. I just had to do a lot. It was like I was back in law school for like 6 months, just trying to cram every like SEC, understanding, and CFTC, and just like general corporate law, which a lot of it translated. Just getting up to speed on that, but really, it's hand holding your client or that person through navigating government regulations. So for me, it was the builders and the devs that like inspired me to want to pick that area of law, because I just felt like I would be so much more productive and learn more. I mean, you the tech that I got to be early in on and see what people are building is really exciting, and I'm just happy that I'm able to like support that as a lawyer.
That's amazing. Yeah, and at the end of the day, I think we need more lawyers in Web3.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's also like a lot of transferable skills. Like, I mean, everything is changing so rapidly, and there's just a lot of information, both, I mean, with government work, but also here in Web3. Um, so, yeah, how do you stay updated? I mean, with all this ever changing information that we have in this environment, like, how do you stay updated with cryptocurrencies or technology? And at the end of the day, with the different laws that apply to each?
Yeah, it gets overwhelming.
Yeah.
There, some weeks are busier than others with different updates in the space or different regulatory matters that are coming down. So it's a lot of like there's lawyer group chats. Devs are part of different DAOs to be supporting each other. Lawyers have different groups to support each other too. So I'm a part of a few groups where we're all constantly talking about some new thing coming down the pike or some decision or some statement, especially with all these conferences. Permissionless just ended, and even in the chat people were like, oh, you got to tune in right now, this person's talking, or like you need to find that on YouTube immediately after because they made some really salient points, or this was really powerful. And so being connected is really important in terms of staying on top of things. And then it's an insane amount of reading at the end of the day where you're just like,
Yeah.
all right, well, this came out, I need to, because it's not enough to just be, read some article. You need to read the material directly from the source. If the SEC files a complaint or a settlement, you need to, like, as the attorney, you need to read it. It's not good enough to just read some shaved version of it on Blockworks, because as an end user, yeah, you're just looking for the highlights, but as a lawyer, you need to read, every sentence, because that is what you're going to be pulling when you're making arguments for your client,
Yeah.
or when you're explaining to your client why they can't maybe do something the way they thought they could because there's more exposure now, because this court has deemed this line of thinking to be risky or to be against this regulation. So really going through a lot of the cases and complaints and SEC stuff and different agencies. I mean, there's a lot of litigation happening. So lower courts are making decisions and moving the ball forward, sometimes moving the ball backwards. So it's just a lot of reading and trying to capture as much as you can, while you're in it, while
Yeah.
you're still trying to be a lawyer.
No, I mean, I kind of want you to be a lawyer right now. Like, could you maybe share an example, like, I mean, of any challenge that you have encountered, specifically within the blockchain space, but also how did law, like blockchain law, help your client in this challenge?
Yeah, so I think it's a really interesting space because the tech moves so much faster than the law.
Yeah.
And when clients come to me, they're like, "Oh, I want to do this, this, and this." And we'll have to say, well, that might not be easily accomplished, because in the US you have these considerations, and there's a lot of friction because clients are like, oh, well, they're doing it, right? Like, this is already happening, it's being done. I want to mirror what this successful project or protocol or layer one has done. Like, they try to mirror a lot, and they think because it's being done, they can do it too. But that's not always the case, because the law is so much slower. Government is slower. Tech moves at such a rapid space. And just because you get away with it or it's working for one entity or company today doesn't mean that's going to be true 5 years from now or a year from now. So a lot of the hand holding that you have to do as a lawyer in this space is simply telling the client, this is where the comfort level is. And as the lawyers, our firm really sees ourselves as like the last line of defense for bad actors. So we
Yeah.
like to have a healthy risk appetite when we're advising and saying, like, this is a gray area and we're making these reasonable arguments for why this should fall on this side of the fence and not this side of the fence. But at the end of the day, we understand that we are the last line of defense for pushing that envelope, and we have our limits too. So there's been occasions where a client just wants to blast through that, and we have to say, if you're going to move forward, then we're not the counsel for you. This isn't going to work. And we've kind of cut those ties in a way that, you know, we had to, because you
Yeah.
just have to protect where you can. But a lot of it is just hand holding and saying, like, there's generally a path forward with most of what people want to do in this space. It's a matter of how much homework you want to do. And by that, I mean how much
Yeah.
you can afford to pay an attorney to do the work for you. So if you do want to do something really complex or really intense, that might be there might be a way to do that, and that might be fine, but it might cost you more than you thought in that legal analysis and that assessment to get your project where it needs to go, to be doing everything you want to be doing.
Yeah, because you have to have like an infinite amount of attention to detail.
Yeah.
It's so hard. Um,
And
but yeah, it sounds really
there's no
exciting.
like one path forward. That's the trick is, if you, it's not just like, oh, well, if you do this, then you're fine. That may not be the case, because if you do this and this other thing and then this other thing, each thing, moves things forwards and backwards with each decision you make. So you have to see it for like the entire machine that it is, and not just, oh, well, we did this, so we're good, right? It's like, well, did you do this also, or did you undo this? Because that might affect the analysis as a whole. So it can get really complicated.
No, it is, but at the end of the day, you just hit the nail on the head. It is something that you have to analyze as a whole. And yeah, you mentioned something really really cool, that the technology is evolving more rapidly than the law. And I was curious, how do you compare like regular contracts to smart contracts? Because I
Yeah,
know that you cannot approach them the same way, right?
exactly. So, smart contracts are usually defined as like a piece of computer code that exists on a blockchain that is self-executing in some way.
Mm,
And it's good to know that as the definition, because what makes a contract is not necessarily what makes a smart contract. So I like to think of them kind of separately. I think even Vitalik said something about, he hates that he named it smart contracts, because it's not a really appropriate name, because it's not a contract, and they're self-executing, but that doesn't mean that they're inherently smart in some way. So I know he had some regrets about the naming, but whether or not smart contracts are legally binding comes down to contract law,
mm,
which just means, is there, offer, acceptance, consideration, legally permissible terms, and like, has there been a meeting of the minds in some way? Meaning, some contracts are legally enforceable even if they're a handshake. What's great about blockchain is that if it is a contract, a legal contract in some sort of code that's been captured in the code, you have
mm.
that in writing. Whereas the handshake contracts of yesteryear were harder to like argue enforceability, because they weren't in writing. So at least with smart contracts, if you've put your code or that contract into some written portion of that self-executing code, then now you've got what's arguably a meeting of the minds, and then hopefully in that you've got offer, acceptance, consideration, and legally permissible terms. So that's what makes a contract. It's just, does that code in the smart contract completely reference every element you need to be an enforceable contract? So we're not quite there yet, I don't think. There's some cases where I think the courts are starting to pull in like what the smart contract said or how it executed as evidence. But I think there's usually a contract separate and aside from the code that you reference and say, hey, this is the contract, and here was the supporting code that self-executed. And that's what we're really arguing about, is like, did it self-execute correctly, or was there a term that was misunderstood so that that it shouldn't have executed? I don't think we're to the point where the contract's written in the code and also self-executing in a way that we're arguing about that just yet.
Yeah. So, do you have like any, for example, if you have a contract that you might have some specific clauses that may or may not like execute, like how would you advise anyone within the Web3 space, like to actually protect their privacy and data? And at the end of the day, like their assets, right?
Yeah. So I think the next wave of smart contract use cases will really be similar to like an escrow situation where you kind of cut out the middleman. It's like this party needs to prove that they have this money here, and this party needs to prove that they can trust that that money source exists. And you have this middleman where the money sits in escrow while they're waiting to check on the house for its, inspection or whatever that may be that requires this escrow where money just kind of sits and waits. Using blockchain and zero knowledge proofs, you can probably get there a lot quicker. But are people there today? Have I seen that where, I'm reviewing contracts that are using ZK proof and smart contracts to execute and cut out the middleman? Not just yet. But eventually, quite possibly, yeah. I think that's where this is headed in terms of efficiencies and why people choose blockchain to prove parties are who they say they are, they have what they say they have, without revealing everything and going through a huge, background check, identity check. That's really not necessary in a lot of cases. I mean, some cases, I'm sure there's something that's to be purchased that you need to have a lot more information, but there's some purchases where escrow exists, and it's like, why do we need this really formal system of proving money when all of this money is really digitally moved to? Like, when people buy a house these days, they're not walking into a bank with $1 million in cash and
Yeah.
sitting it down and saying, put this in escrow, I need to prove I have it. Like, we've switched to digital commerce almost exclusively in some places. So that's where this is headed. So using blockchain as a way to pull back on some of that excess data that doesn't need to be part of a transaction, that you can still trust that transaction without revealing too much about any one party.
That's actually really exciting, and hopefully we see more of that soon. Yeah, so like switching gears a little, I wanted to ask you about ETHMiami. You mentioned like experiencing the Web3 environment in Miami firsthand, and yeah, I wanted to know how excited are you for ETHMiami?
I mean, I live in South Florida, so the scene in Miami is definitely stronger and more vibrant in terms of like the tech boom that's like being experienced here. I have a lot of friends in some other tech oriented areas, and they're not as excited. There's a pulse
Yeah,
to Miami that's like, Miami doesn't sleep. And so if you're in an industry that comes to Miami, there's an excitement to that, especially during, the bull run that Miami experienced, when we all did. There was something extra about Miami during that bull run that, like, you didn't feel that same thrill in other cities I visited and went to conferences at. So there's definitely an excitement to Miami. And then, it's fall, so Miami's great because it's still not cold. So if you're a place that got cold quickly, you're like, oh, Miami, Miami will be nice because it won't be, it'll be really great. The environment's great, the weather's great. You can go anywhere. There's so many outside events, so there's so many side events and activations that people just naturally have. I mean, if you follow the chain Miami, if you're coming to Miami for ETHMiami, or any event thereafter, because there's so many like, I think ETHMiami kicks off, and then later that month there'll be like the Art Basel stuff, and usually DecentralCon comes and all those other events. So it'll be a run of show. I think ETHMiami kicks off the season of events for Miami. So if you're in Miami, you should join the chain Miami. They're on Twitter, and it's a great way to get an information on all the events. Shout out to those guys and the founders of that team. It's a great series. It's a great way to track all the events because there's going to be so many activations during ETHMiami that it'll be something you don't want to miss out on, because even if you can't be, you're going to have to choose which events to go to. There'll be that many, I'm sure. You can't be everywhere, but I think because ETHMiami will draw so many people, because people expect Miami to be very crypto friendly, very pro crypto, very positive towards all the things in
yeah,
crypto. So sticking with that, like, companies like to be here, they like to have events, they like to And they just like to be in Miami. There's an energy to Miami that's great.
Yeah, like the Miami vibes. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it is a growing. I mean, it's a very vibrant crypto hub in the United
Yeah.
States. And
I
yeah,
mean,
you just yeah, go ahead.
the mayor of Miami accepts his
Yeah,
payment in Bitcoin. So, he's made a bold statement to say, if you're in tech and you're tired of like not getting support from whatever city you're in, come build here. And he made it a particularly salient shout out to the crypto and blockchain and those kinds of emerging tech communities, to be like, if it's not working where you're at, come here. We'll help you find office space. We'll help you find whatever you need. And he followed up with it. That was what's crazy. And that's why you
that's
saw
insane.
a crazy tech boom specifically for crypto and blockchain. You saw that happen in Miami because he said it on Twitter, which is like crypto Twitter is, powerful. So he said it on Twitter and then he followed up and meant it. So then companies that moved here would say, yeah, I moved here and this mayor helped me, or someone on his team was able to connect me with someone, and it made this transition easier. And then other companies were like, oh, that's great. Let me get there too.
Yeah, now companies like they want to be in Miami, and also
Absolutely.
people like we enjoy Miami. Um, but yeah, like how do you see this transition like shaping the future, not only of Miami, but specifically like the future of blockchain in the United States? I think it's a pretty important, yeah, a pretty important step for both the future of blockchain, but also like blockchain law specifically.
Yeah, so the future of crypto and blockchain in the US is currently being battled by the SEC and CFTC and any other agency. The IRS is definitely taking a strong stance in their approach. I mean, the first question on your taxes this year, the very first question was like, did you own? Did you like possess? They made it very broad. It was like, did you own or trade or do anything basically with
Yeah.
digital assets? And that's a strong, that like having that as question number one of your taxes, that's letting you know where the IRS's head is at. And that's, one agency. Now you have the SEC, who's takes every public appearance possible to just diss crypto and say that they are here to protect the consumer, and all of their decisions are in that vein. And you're starting to see it. They've doubled their staff, and you're starting to see these complaints come out and these settlements come out. And they're rocking the community. The XRP win with the lower court is the lower court, so there's more to come. The SEC appealed or submitted their rebuttal almost instantly to that case, and that's going to a higher court, and and probably an even higher court, and could eventually end up in the Supreme Court's hands. So that's to be determined. Even though it was an early court win, there's still a lot more fight left to have. And then now you see Coinbase, who's this huge conglomerate that's finally reached a point of really butting heads with the SEC, because the SEC is definitely ready to take their stand against them, and they're leading the charge. The Coinbase team is very savvy. They work really hard, and we're all rooting for them to fight this good fight for all of us in this tech, because what we're really starting to see in the US is companies leaving. And that's just sad for the US, because the US will lose in a tech race. Infrastructure, the US has great infrastructure. That's what made the Industrial Revolution possible here, and what gave us such a big advantage. That infrastructure exists here, but it also exists other places. If you can have reliable Wi-Fi and electricity everywhere, then the competitive advantage of the US in being anti this new emerging tech is going to be something that really hurts us in the long run. And we're starting to see that. I have at least two friends I know that their companies have said, you don't have to be anywhere in particular, but you cannot be in the US by the end of this year. And they're completely leaving all their ties to the US for that reason. So these families, they're moving their whole family, like husbands, wives, children, they're all leaving the US. And what's crazy is that the companies are saying, we're not saying where you have to be. All we're saying is you cannot be in the US,
Yeah,
which is
anywhere
like a
else.
strong stance. I mean,
Yeah,
it's different to be like, oh, we need to be like, during the tech rush, it was like, we need to be in San Francisco during the dot-com boom, because that's where the action was. this is different. It's not that they need to be somewhere, it's that they can't be here. And that's a strong message for this tech that's clearly not going anywhere. If we're seeing Facebook and Google be the competitors for a one-stop shop login to every single website you visit, blockchain can solve for some of that, because I don't want to give all that data privacy away. But if I have to sign in some way to your website to verify who I am, blockchain can come in using ZK proofs and a verifiable identity while I control my data privacy. That's a future. That's a real future. And blockchain's competing with Facebook and Google and all the other services out there in that realm, but they're getting really disadvantaged here in the US, where clearly Google and Facebook have a super advantage. So this is the tech race that's happening, and the US might just lose.
Ooh, that's
I know
that's.
that's such a gloomy, but it's not.
Right.
It's
I'm
not
sorry.
over.
It is
It
not
doesn't
over.
mean blockchain's leaving forever. It just means the US needs to get their ship in order.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We have time for one final question, and I wanted to ask you if you have any advice, any comments, suggestions for hackers in general, but specifically for non-technical people that want to get involved with blockchain law. Do you have any advice for them, specifically for people who are coming to ETHMiami?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, everyone in Miami in my experience has been wildly welcoming. So if you're enthusiastic about the tech, you don't have to prove yourself in the tech right away. Be enthusiastic, be willing to jump in where you can, where your skills lie. Don't fake a resume just to get involved in a project. Come to the table with what you have. And people are really receptive to that, because Web3 rewards those who are hands-on and contribute. Web3, the whole concept of like DAOs and Web3 is that, it's community based and truly contribution based, right? Like,
Yeah.
I get to be involved in this DAO, and this DAO only works because I'm contributing. So I think the first thing is, don't be afraid to just dive in and contribute what you can. Don't fake contribution, and don't lie about it or go out of your depth, but be clear about where your weaknesses are, but contribute your strengths for sure, because people are really receptive to that. And that's exactly how I got in. It was baptism by fire for sure. And curiosity really drove my entry point. So I think follow your curiosities. If you're not interested in smart contracts, then don't force it. Go find a community that makes sense to you and be community oriented. There's so much in this emerging tech and blockchain space that you can get involved in that you don't even know about. So really just follow your curiosity. And I would say, as a builder, the number one piece of advice I give to builders is, people get scared of lawyers because they're so expensive, and that's possibly true in a lot of scenarios. But as a builder, you should just be thoughtful along the way. So if you don't have a huge budget, you still need to protect yourself. That's still something you're building. There's still probably IP there, and there's still probably multiple people involved in it. So you need a founders agreement, or you need some meeting of the minds, because if those minds ever stop meeting, there's IP on the table, or there's code on the table, or there's an idea on the table that now it's really murky as to how the person that still wants to build is going to move forward with that idea or that IP or that code. So I'm not saying you got to go pay a $10,000 retainer to somebody, but you can talk to, most lawyers will take a 30-minute call for free and get you, a thoughtful approach to how you can piecemeal together like a good legal coverage. And it's just something you're going to have to touch back on. So, today you created some sort of agreement between your team. Tomorrow you might need something else. So you just got to check back in as things change. But it doesn't have to be some crazy lift. And if an attorney makes you feel dumb or crazy, or, you know,
Oh,
is
hopefully
a
that
hole,
doesn't
then
happen.
go to another attorney, because like there's so many of us out there. You want to work with someone who wants to work with you. And I just think you need to be thoughtful, because there's so much incredible tech that's about to come out. There's so much cool stuff that can be built, and that to be tripped up by the legal side of things because you didn't think you could afford an attorney is devastating. because I want to see these projects get built, and the things that make them come crashing down are the founder disagreements and people leaving, and then now you can't keep going because this guy's, saying you can't build without him because you didn't have an agreement, and that's tragic in my mind. So just being thoughtful and like talking to people, because people will talk back to you and
Yeah.
say, yeah, this is, let me introduce you to this source, or like let me connect you with this person.
Yeah, I actually that's absolutely amazing advice. Elsie, I just wanted to ask you, is there anywhere where people might reach out to you on
Yes.
social media?
So I'm the same thing on all social media because I'm LC. So I'm Learned Chaos
Okay.
on Twitter, Instagram,
Yeah.
Telegram, like anything with the username, I'm Learned Chaos. So you can reach me there, or you can email me at laura@iblpartners.com. That's my law firm email. And I'm happy to talk to anyone about what they're building. And I'm super happy to see you and everyone else at ETHMiami so soon.
Elsie, I can't wait to see you. Thank you so much.
Thank
Also,
you.
people, don't forget to register at ethmiami.net. And I mean, I'm so excited to see you. I just can't.
Yes, it's going to be so great. I can't
Thank you
wait.
so
Thank you so
much.
much for having me. It'll be
Thank you.
awesome.
It is an honor having you here. Thank you so much. Have a great day.